And now, this.
Okay, let's go. Harry Tracy.
Harry Tracy! Trigger warning. The following contains the authentic accounts of factual historical figures and events. If historical information may upset you, then please withdraw now. Retreat.
Well, I guess you know who I am.
Harry Tracy is a true story. This telling is authored from sources spanning over 120 years. All characterized quotations are verbatim from interviews, newspaper articles, and testimonials taken at the time. Scott Martinez. Part 6. Prison. Escape. When Harry Tracy entered the Oregon State Penitentiary to do a 20-year sentence, he stated his occupation as a cook. He had previously worked as a cook when a kid in the logging camps of Wisconsin.
In conversation with him, he was very direct, and although devoid of much education, he had a good use of language.
Joseph D. Lee, a political appointee of Governor T.T. Geer, served as superintendent of the Oregon State Penitentiary when Tracy and Merrill made their break.
Since my contact with criminals and my study of related subjects commencing in 1894 when I became an officer in the municipal court of the city of Portland, I have not met a man with so many strong points as to qualify him for a successful criminal career as Harry Tracy. Well, I am Tracy.
Prison officials noted that Tracy had deep-set blue eyes, and that his upper jaw had been broken, and that his front teeth were in a state of decay, that he measured 5'8" 3/4, had a hat size of 7 1/8, and a shoe size of 7.
His quickness of apprehension and decision was Napoleonic. He had a nerve of steel.
Superintendent Lee wrote in his 1902 biennial report,
"With him, the taking of a human life was the question of expedience only."
Extra edition. Tracy shoots down several pursuers. Fought like a wild beast at bay. Sheriff Cudahy returns to Seattle. Disgusted.
T.T. Geer's predecessor, a Republican, William Payne Lord, inaugurated Oregon's 9th governor in January 1895. Lord was a vocal proponent of prison reform, but not rehabilitation, rather discipline, security, and economic management of the prisoners and facility.
To ease the taxpayers' burden imposed by misfits and failures.
On March 11, 1895, A.N. Gilbert, a Republican ally of Governor Lord, assumed his duties as superintendent of the Oregon State Penitentiary and was committed to similar prison reforms as Governor Lord. As a reformer, Gilbert was an adamant defender of corporal punishment.
Not a single case of insubordination or serious trouble of any kind has occurred.
Enforced discipline and fortification of the physical prison itself became the Gilbert administration's main function of reform, quickly identifying the decaying wooden structures as blatant fire hazards.
Were a fire started in the basement, the prison would go up like a tinderbox, and every prisoner would be cremated.
In 1897, then superintendent for several years, Gilbert officially stated his analysis of conditions of the Oregon State Penitentiary in his biennial report.
During the period of my incumbency as superintendent, I have traveled to some extent, and I have made it my business to visit the penal institutions of 7 other states, and I must say that I feel somewhat humiliated in being forced to the admission that Oregon has the poorest on the line of conveniences, sanitary conditions, furniture, appliances, buildings, and everything.
T.T. Geer, Oregon's 10th governor.
Geer has a wheel. Governor-elect learned to ride in 2 lessons.
Was the first governor to be born in the state of Oregon. also publicly dedicated to prison reform, as he clearly pronounced in his inaugural address. It now costs between $8 and $10 to take a prisoner from the Marion County Courthouse to prison, while an attendant from that institution could do the same work for 15 cents. It was T.T., or Theodore Thurston, who was governor when Harry Tracy and David Merrill violently escaped, killing 3 guards.
Sensational outbreak at the state prison.
Theodore Thurston, who had appointed Joseph D. Lee superintendent to the Oregon State Prison to reform the institution.
Laxity in discipline is a mistaken kindness to prisoners. It invites insubordination and attempts to escape, which usually result in the loss of life.
A detective named Joseph Day reported that water torture was a tactic frequently employed at the penitentiary. The miserable victim is stripped to the waist, handcuffed to the wall with his arms outstretched. A powerful stream of water was then turned on him, tearing, bruising, and all but drowning the poor unfortunate. No wonder they cringed and defied the guards to shoot. The governor authorized to contract and lease the labor of the inmates in order to assist in the funding of the institution. A labor contract with Goldsmith and Lowenberg of the Northwest Foundry Corporation established a stove factory in the prison and employed prison labor, providing much-needed income for the state, and was further touted as therapeutic reform for the inmates.
Idleness amongst the inmates is disastrous to the prisoners' morale and to the public's welfare.
The Oregon State Prison's reputation as a prison in business is particularly highlighted by the development, production, and popularity of the Oregon boot.
Oregon boot is regarded as one of the best and most effective shackles known.
J.C. Gardner, first warden of the Oregon State Penitentiary in 1866, had devised a modern manacle he declared the Gardner Shackle, but it was better known to the world as the Oregon Boot. Tracy was no stranger to the Oregon Boot, having been manacled before in Utah and Colorado.
Tracy murders attributed to revenge for being forced to don heavy boot.
J.C. owned the patent on the Oregon Boot. The shackle had a solid lead core and was nickel-plated. On completion of the prison, the inmates would go on to produce the Oregon Boot in mass, a thick, heavy metal weight that locks around the top of one's ankle.
No one has ever escaped from an Oregon boot.
The Art Burnside Sporting Goods of Spokane became the sole manufacturer of the Oregon Boot, and it was in service till at least 1939 for inmate transport and punishment. Trade publications selling the boot declared,
"The only way to get an Oregon boot off is with a key."
Wearing the Oregon Boot, many sustained serious injury, infection, and permanent physical damage. David Merrill was said to have gained a limp from his time in the Oregon Boot. Some inmates would later claim David Merrill's permanent and pronounced injury was not apparent on the faceless corpse determined to be David Merrill when the body was returned to prison.
Body identified to be Merrill. The face is unrecognizable.
Conditions and treatment such as the boot were routine in the penitentiary. Prisoner beatings, floggings, and punishments would commonly escalate to outright execution or default to murder by means of malicious neglect. The blatant brutality of the prison is perhaps felt best in terms of emotional impact by Joseph Kelly in his 1908 published accounts, 13 Years in the Oregon Penitentiary. Bunko, as he self-identifies, is most famous as a prolific Portland crimper. A crimper, someone specializing professionally in Shanghai. Shanghai being the act of abducting often inebriated or otherwise compromised people into compulsory service aboard a boat or ship in sudden servitude.
Sailors be slaves no more.
But Joseph Kelly was never convicted as a crimper. Bunko was convicted for murder.
Bunko Kelly, convicted.
Bunko denied ever attempting to sell opium to G.W. Sayers, denied hacking G.W. to death, and denied throwing Sayers in the Willamette River, declared he'd been set up by rival crimpers.
Bunko Kelly, pardoned after 13 years.
And despite some strong evidence to support his claims of innocence, up the river Bunko went, an inmate at the Oregon State Prison for 13 years. Kelly's accounts are full of brutal men like Charles Sherwood, who was promoted to the deputy warden with the nickname Man of Flogs, or guard Jack Stapleton, dubbed the Jack of Clubs. He did in fact do time with Harry Tracy and David Merrill.
Tracy was known as a gunman.
Harry Tracy and David Merrill, two convicted criminals, previous partners in crime, became cellmates and co-workers assigned to the foundry to toil at hard labor in the molding room together. Making stoves was a highly questioned and debated practice, as 3 years and 77 days later. June 9th, 1902, a Monday morning. Following mandatory chapel, Harry Tracy and David Merrill reported to their usual detail in the prison foundry, making stoves. Secreted amongst their tools and stove patterns, they found two 30-30 Winchesters and several boxes of ammunition.
The guns were placed in the molding room. They did not go there of their own accord.
Bunko gave this account of the breakout.
Guard Farrell was standing near the door rolling a cigarette when Tracy and Merrill picked up the guns and walked up to Farrell. He turned and saw them coming. He threw up his hands.
You had your day, and now it is mine.
Shot the officer without another remark. Tracy and Merrill were taking their time, walking through the shops with a ladder.
Harry shot and killed guard SRT Jones, who was on the wall in charge of the northern post. From a distance of 150 yards, 450 feet, with the first weapon he'd touched in 3 years, a Winchester 30-30 he'd had in his hands moments.
Top of the wall, he began firing like a rapid-fire gun until Merrill climbed up to the top.
Guard B.T. Tiffany and Guard Ross were forced to march in front of the escaping convicts, acting as a human shield for 100 yards as other guards began to fire from the wall. Guard B.T. Tiffany did die in this exchange, and his death is credited to Merrill and Tracy. However, it is possible that friendly fire or a bullet from a gun of another guard is what laid him to rest. Regardless, Harry Tracy and David Merrill were long gone.
He was especially fortunate in having intelligent and shrewd outside help. We kept him much longer than had any other prison.
Superintendent Joseph D. Lee, in his biennial report, wrote a candid account that confirmed the details of Bunko Kelly's story.
There has been but one jail delivery, which occurred on Monday morning, June 9, 1902, when David Merrill and Harry Tracy escaped from the molding room of the workshops. Of their escape, flight, and death, I will speak somewhat in detail. Their escape was accomplished by outside help. During the preceding night, probably 2 rifles and a good supply of ammunition were secreted with the working tools of these 2 men. Shop guard Frank S. Merrill and wall guards SRT Jones and B.T. Tiffany were fatally shot. Convict Frank S. Ingram received a bullet in his left leg, which necessitated its amputation. The escapees scaled the wall by means of a ladder, which was used for oiling the machinery in the shops. Several shots were fired at them, but the range was long, and they were unhurt.
Trap for posse. Convicts plan to kill their pursuers.
Expected to be caught quickly,
Convicts will soon be killed or captured.
Tracy and Merrill became instantly elusive by doubling back to Salem, arriving at the home of J.W. Roberts.
I just returned home about 10 o'clock last evening from downtown.
J.W. was a resident of Salem.
I presumed there were members of the search party returning home. Hands up and be quiet.
June 10th, 1902, 9:30 a.m., the morning after the breakout, they were in Jervis, about 10 miles north of Salem, holding up 2 returning posse members, Dr. P.S. White and a farmer, stealing their horse and buggy and heading north. That evening, Tracy and Merrill appeared at a woodcutter's named August King.
They were very polite.
Offered to pay any price I wanted for some food. They employed mistakers in the kitchen.
We are the terrible escaped convicts, and we want breakfast.
While in the middle of the meal, the whistle from the nearby sawmill blew, and they both jumped up like rockets.
They had dinner at the residence of E.D. Graves and left with 5 pounds of his bacon. Oregon Governor T.T. Gear called out the militia.
Orders out state militia! Escaped convicts add other crimes to triple murder. The convicts steal horses in Salem. Bold outlaws mount animals and ride away.
By June 11th, more than 250 militiamen, sheriffs, deputy sheriffs, and newspaper men could not find Harry Tracy or David Merrill. The bloodhounds brought in from Walla Walla, Washington State Penitentiary with much fanfare, and their handler, guard E.M. Carson, prominently featured in the newspapers, failed to produce results. And the Oregonian declared,
Where the convicts are now, no one knows. They may be walking calmly along some country road in eastern Clackamas County, headed for the mountains, or they may be working their way to Portland.
Oregon Prison Superintendent Lee.
I shall never rest until I run the fiends down.
By June 14th, most of the posse retired.
The posse is positive that the men have not crossed the river.
From the stern of the boat, Winchester in his lap.
3 men forced to ferry the escapees across the Columbia.
Harry Tracy gave a casual account of their escape.
I wasn't the least bit afraid of them bloodhounds.
Cayenne pepper dropped in tracks. Put dogs off scent for a time.
Those guards were fools to allow us to climb up that ladder and skin up those walls.
On June 16th, it was reported widely that Tracy and Merrill were now in Washington state.
Outlaw Tracy very much alive.
On July 1st, at 5 a.m., Tracy appeared on South Bay, Puget Sound, near Capital City Oyster Company, alone.
He is going it alone in the state of Washington.
Tracy was asked where David Merrill was, his fellow escapee and partner in crime.
David Merrill was a no-good coward who had it coming for a long time. I killed that son of a bitch several days ago.
So if you watch that whole video, you're pretty cool.
The preceding was one part of a 9-part project. To watch the next part, click here. Or to view the entire Harry Tracy documentary, click here. Well, that's just damn good news.